Morning. I am Jackie Rowell, Early Career Fellow in Community Engaged Humanities Research and a Scholar of Food Studies at the Jackman Humanities Institute at the University of Toronto. I welcome you to this online workshop on developing a toolkit for community engaged research featuring the Feeding City Lab. This is the second event in a two-part series sponsored by the Jackman Humanities Institute and the Culinaria Research Centre at the University of Toronto. Feeding City is a lab house at the Culinaria Research Centre made up of scholars, advocates, educators, and students dedicated to tracking and sharing information about how food growers, buyers, workers, and providers are affected by the COVID-19 pandemic locally and globally. We do this by engaging with community organizations, municipalities, and academic partners through cross-sectoral qualitative research to foster ways to build back better to a more resilient and sustainable food future. In this first hour, I will be joined by Joe Sharma, Feeding City Lab Director, and community collaborator Jennifer Forde, founder of Toronto's Courtyard and Scarborough Farmers Markets, to discuss community food supports and knowledge mobilization. So this first hour is being recorded. We will then take a 10-minute break to regroup, and the second hour will focus on researcher reflexivity and using autoethnography as a tool to open up new pathways in community engaged research. So we'll have the opportunity to do some workshopping. That second hour will not be recorded. So please join us for as long as you are able to stay this morning and into the afternoon. So before introducing our speakers, I'd like to first acknowledge this land. The place where many of us work and live is on the traditional lands of the Huron-Wendat, Seneca, and most recently, the Mississaugas of the Credit River. Today, it is home to many Indigenous peoples from across Turtle Island, and I am grateful to live and work on this land. Such land acknowledgements do not exist in a past tense, as colonialism is a current and ongoing process. At the Feeding City Initiative, we call on each of us to think of such relationships of land, peoples, power, and struggles for equity across and beyond the spaces where we see ourselves as belonging. Particularly relevant to our conversation is the Indigenous law of this land that lies with the Dish with One Spoon territory. The Dish with One Spoon is a treaty between the Anishinaabes, the Mississaugas, and the Haudenosaunee that bound people to share the territory and protect the land. This law asks that those who live here share the responsibility of ensuring that the dish is never empty. This includes taking care of the land and all of the creatures with whom we share it. It is my great pleasure now to introduce our guest today. Joe Sharma is Associate Professor at the Culinaria Research Centre and Director of the UTSC SF3 Cluster and the Feeding City Lab at the University of Toronto. She leads the Feeding City Research Lab and is also Director of the Sustainable Food and Farming Futures. This is what we call the SF3 Cluster in the scholarly Clusters of Scholarly Prominence program at UTSC. Her research examines food, mobilities, labor, family, and gender in imperial and post-colonial spaces, including in the city of Toronto. Jennifer Forde is founder of Courtyard and Scarborough Farmers Markets, Red Onion Events, and Vision Quest Event Management. Jennifer brings nutrient-dense, affordable, culturally appropriate, locally grown produce and unique products to diverse communities with a concentration in her beloved Scarborough. She aims to combat inequality in the access to affordable, healthy, culturally appropriate foods in the GTA more broadly. Jennifer also manages the flagship Nathan Phillips Square Market and the North York Farmers Market, and is also manager of the West End Farmers Markets. Welcome. Thank you for making the time to join us today, Jennifer. Let's begin with your work. So I'm going to stop the share right now, and we can just have a conversation about the markets that you're leading and some of the work that you're doing and how you became involved with the Feeding City Lab as a community collaborator. Can you tell us a little bit about your work and how you came to become a collaborator with Feeding City?
Good morning. I started my work with farmers markets in 2017 with the Nathan Phillips Square Farmers Market. In 2018, I launched the Malvern Farmers Market. And honestly, why we started that market, I grew up for the most part in Malvern, and we still practice at a church in Malvern. And some of the grand dames there realized or understood that I was managing the Nathan Phillips Square Farmers Market, and really entreated me to start a market in Malvern, Scarborough particularly. There's a history of radioactive soil from World War II in pockets in Malvern. Thus, it's not entirely safe at all times to strike a kitchen garden on your property. It would be prudent to have that reviewed before doing so. So, as I said, many of the matriarchs and patriarchs of Malvern asked me to start a market, and from there it grew. So we had the Malvern Farmers Market in 2018. In 2019, I was contracted by Canada Life, London Life, and Great West Life Realty Associates to start a workplace wellness market at the flagship 300 University Avenue site. That took me to 2019 and 2020. In the height of the pandemic, we launched a 6-week pilot program at the adjacent to the Scarborough Civic Center Library at the Hand of God Park, Frank Forde Wood. We ran that for 6 weeks, a number of vendors and I, just to reconfirm our initial thoughts that yes, market in Scarborough, regular market, is not only viable, it's vital. And then in 2021, we all got together once again and we launched 3 markets, 2 in Scarborough in high priority neighborhoods. The first in my beloved Malvern at the Rosebank Park, located at Markham and Progress in the heart of Malvern. Another market in a high priority neighborhood. I can't stand that term, but it's indicative of many other things. We opened a market there at the Oak Ridge Park, Danforth and Pharmacy, and then finally the Courtyard Farmers Market at the Fairmont Park, Cotswell and Gerrard, which for the most part, you would think that it would be a fairly affluent area, but they are pockets of abject difficulty within that neighborhood that we aim to assist or with the markets.
Thank you, Jennifer. And so one of the things that's really most notable is that you use your position and experience as an entrepreneur to become an advocate, and you have an eagerness to mentor in work with other entrepreneurs. Can you talk a little bit more about building that network of entrepreneurial stakeholders within the city through markets by creating more opportunities to access fresh fruit and vegetables?
Well, I want to say, first off, I want to convey my sincere and heartfelt thanks and love to Professor Sharma. We met about a year ago at the Scarborough Food Network meetings. Professor Sharma is tenacious. She is absolutely welcoming. And with a team of fabulous students, I can't name them all, but I will try. Jeffrey, Cheryl, Daphne, Jamie, Olivia, Sebastian, Joelle, beloved Noah, Jacqueline, yourself. If I have missed anyone, I convey my heartfelt regrets. With this team, I have really been able to manifest, what our vision, especially taking on 3 markets for one summer also managing additional wider markets, I could not have been able to do this without the help of my Feeding City team, and I am completely in your debt. So that is first off. I absolutely adore my team. Why I started the markets. I don't start markets in areas that are highly subscribed by other managers. I make a concerted effort to open markets in culturally diverse neighborhoods that I think are not attractive to wider market managers. They are in suburban areas, they are outside of the central business district, but in aiming to open markets in areas that are not popular for different reasons, I think we are creating a niche, and people are recognizing the importance of such initiatives. I aim to partner with small family Ontario farms, businesses led by people in career transitions, people with different abilities, people of color, new immigrants, and women-led enterprises. So that is the mandate, and our aim is to partner with a diversity of people, so the vendors behind the booths reflect the interests and the origins of the people who are in front of the booth, our customers, our guests, and our stakeholders.
Thanks, Jennifer. And one of the things that I think is most striking about your description is that the markets are about promoting access, but also about people and about forging connections between vendors and consumers and local residents within the community. And I just wanted to highlight that aspect, which is really central to what we do in food studies, that food is about people and about communities and about relationships between people. I saw that come out it really struck me in your answer. So thank you for sharing that. I'm wondering, you mentioned as well some of the work that the Feeding City Lab that we've done in collaboration over the last year, and it's just been such a pleasure to work with your team on that and with the students. Can you tell us a little bit more about some of the work that you did with the students in collaboration to support the markets? I'm thinking, the publicity materials or the music. Can you give us a couple of examples of how this community collaboration kind of flourished?
As aforementioned, I would not have been able to launch the amount of markets we did last year and maintain the current roster that I already had in my plate. From the web development with Jeffrey and Joel, who have now inherited that, from the graphic developments with Cheryl. Professor Sharma, please add in anyone I am missing. From Cheryl to Daphne, who help on the graphic communications. Jamie really spearheads, I would say, Jamie's doing quite a bit of vendor outreach. She's also working in consort with Daphne. We have just set up a fantastic MailChimp e-blast service, which we now have tied to our Instagram feeds. Olivia single-handedly really helps me manage another initiative that we start later in the summer at the St. Andrew's Harvest pop-up, from refurbishing our vendor applications to our volunteer applications, to posting information on online calendars, in any market news. it is a huge team of people working together in concert and love to push these markets forward. We meet weekly under the guidance of Noah Allison, and we just strike. We set up last year, Sebastian Rosas set up an amazing link tree service where you can easily find our applications, where our artists can also register, which is another program that Jamie spearheads. She and I get the artists lined up. We promote them online, download their bios and their pics. We work in consort with the Beach Hill Neighborhood Association at the Courtyard Market. We have a weekly infusion of local art, and local artists visit with us, which we establish in consort with Jamie and an artist in the area, Karen Franson, sorry, and also Victoria, who I failed to mention. Sorry, Professor Sharma. Victoria last year was really instrumental in helping us really set up the online calendars and getting our word out there to increase search engine optimization. It now has been inherited by Olivia, but Victoria not only did that, she also helped implement a relationship with Toronto Free Little Pantry. So we and she was very instrumental in helping us set up that initiative. So you know, visitors coming to the market can leave a non-perishable food item, and we collect it and we take it to the pantry every Wednesday. So that is a microcosm of some of the fantastic work that our Feeding the City team does. I must also add that we are the only farmers market, for sure, in the Greater Toronto area who has a farm fully associated with the market. So I have a small farm plot at the Malvern Urban Farm.
And this is new. This is a recent development.
Last year, we also launched that last year. Yeah. So we actually farm, and our aim is to bring culturally appropriate, nutrient-dense, organically grown produce to our market in Scarborough, which I would say is really, really right now led in love with the Feeding the City team. And so we're working with different groups, Rosebank Food Bank, Marina Carrillo, Toronto Food City Council, St. Andrews, Scarborough Co-op, Feeding the City. So those are just some of the partners that we developed that work with us along with Feeding the City.
Thanks, Jennifer. And there's been new collaborations that have come out as well. And this actually brings me to the next question, because you've spoken about some of the physical spaces in the city, the gardening plots and the markets on site. And you also have recently developed partnership with an online market. So how do the physical spaces mesh with the online markets, and how is this developed out of new collaborations that have come out of really the pandemic experience?
So in 2020, I launched my first online markets, and I recently, due to the fantastic infusion of talent from Feeding City and Professor Sharma's cohort, I refurbished it and now work with a group called freshfind.ca, and they're in concert with Jamie and Daph and Joel we have refurbished the online presence and have a brand new online market. What happens is that in November, we move to an online platform. You order online, place the orders by Thursday. We have curbside pickup and or delivery on Sundays. That actually was born in the height of the pandemic in 2020. And I also there would like to say that we were one of the first markets at that time to be even looking to do this. We had wider pickup points in Scarborough on different days, and to meet the demands of, you know, the first throes of the battle with the pandemic. We have now streamlined that particular relationship. And in all honesty, it was a bit of a slow pickup in November, but I have now managed to find partnerships with Food Share and with Fennings Farm. Fennings Farm will be our organic food supplier produce, and Food Share, under the watchful eye of Daphne and Jamie, we're doing a big launch this week. We're launching our first deliveries with Food Share this week, and Fennings will follow. Why this is important, and this was actually reaffirmed with the relationship with Fresh Find. We were finding that we didn't have we needed the breads and the weekly purchase items on the site to drive sales. So now we have the produce, and Fresh Find really encouraged me to do so. Now we have that. We are already seeing, and this based on the fantastic work of the Feeding the City team and our marketing, we already see on the site, the analytics are going up, the hits are going up, and it's because the produce is there now. So we're very excited about this initiative. Hopefully our aim is, come May, the curbside delivery and pickup option will finish, and we will have any online orders being picked up on site at the market.
Terrific. And I will just share a couple of slides to kind of show some of the visuals that you were referencing here. So this is an example of some of the work that Feeding City scholar and student Matilda wrote up recently with more details about your collaboration with Food Share and Fennings Organics. So this is available on the Feeding City website as of last week, and just a couple of the posters to showcase your upcoming markets here.
Thank you very much.
So
that's
the Courtyard.
My mom.
Courtyard Farmers Market. So that's launching in June. And I just wanted to mention the website is here. I'll drop the links as well into the chat. But the Fresh Find it's so seamlessly integrated into the website that anybody who is attending here, I really encourage you to go and explore the websites to learn more about the markets, but also this kind of really novel integration of the physical geographical space of the market with the online space and how they can complement one another. So the Courtyard Farmers Market and then the Scarborough Farmers Markets launching in June as well. Jen, we are rounding up to 11:30. So I just wanted to ask, is there anything else you wanted to share with us before we wrap up?
I would just like to reiterate my thanks, Jacqueline, for this opportunity. I really appreciate the time you took to spend with me. Professor Sharma, always love, always love. And again, thank you very much to the fabulous team that you have appropriated to assist with this initiative. One love. Thank you very much.
Jennifer, thanks so much for joining us.
It's our honor and pleasure, Jennifer. And I just want to also point out that these students range from first year undergraduates to fourth year. And, we wouldn't have been able to recruit them without the assistance of the Trinity College Sustainability Lab. So it is something where, in this audience from the University of Toronto, I think, this is what happens when, those pesky things like departments and units and majors and minors don't get in the way. And that is something, of course, at Culinaria. So we are looking forward. And of course, one of the things is Jen has actually not met most of us in person yet. So that's also what we hope to do. But also we invite all of you to the different markets that Jen has founded, but is also running both in Scarborough and in Toronto. Thank you, Jen. And thank you, Jackie.
Yes, thank you, Jen. Bye-bye.
God bless. Have a great day, everyone. Thank you, Anita. Bye.
Bye. So, Joe, we will continue on here, and I think I just wanted to pick up on a couple of the streams that you introduced here. So we have a few minutes to talk about the Feeding City Labs collaboration with the markets, but also I just wanted to emphasize that the market is one dimension or plank of the broader initiative of Feeding City Lab. So take us back, for those who don't know the broader work of the lab, to spring 2020. The Feeding City Lab, what is now the Feeding City Lab, actually developed over the course of almost 2 years now, but it emerged out of a pandemic pivot, and you were able to mobilize really quickly in spring 2020. So how were you able to do that? When we're thinking about building a toolkit for community engaged research and some of the lessons we can draw out of our work in the lab together and with collaborators, what pieces did you already have in place that allowed you to move quickly to work with community collaborators on growing initiatives?
I will say, looking back to March 2020, that the negative part of it, of course, was that feeling of utter helplessness that we all had. That as scholars, as citizens, as, just as people who are advocates in our, own small ways, we, a lot of us were casting around for things we could do, both to keep our research lives going, our lives as teachers, but also as, what could we do to make a difference? And oddly enough, this is where one successful and research grant that has to be suspended, which is my work with sustainable farm-to-table initiatives in India, and an unsuccessful one, which actually resulted out of years of, informal collaborations through Culinaria with a network of community folks in Scarborough and in Toronto. So that grant was called From Garden to Kitchen. I was just revisiting it. It was an unsuccessful application to the Community Partnership Research Initiative at the University of Toronto. And, in fact, that was maybe the last in-person meeting I had before the pandemic, is that a bunch of people from the community organizations came to my house. Over lunch, we trashed out the grant. We talked about all the things we do, which involved basically connecting the different pieces, the different community groups that are working on food advocacy, on food assistance, on food systems and food culture. Because what happens is that you have all these different kinds of atomized organizations that are doing similar things and that have exciting things to share, but often do not have the capacity to do it itself. So our grant was about making those connections. And I see Irina in the audience because Irina has, the different exhibitions she's done through Museum Studies was also an inspiration, because we had hoped on to come to a public, front-facing kind of side of that project. Well, we didn't get that grant, but in March 2020, that is where I literally could call up some of our community collaborators. Debbie Field, Executive Director of Food Share, now the moving spirit behind the Coalition for Healthy School Foods.
So these were collaborations that you already had in place as
Exactly.
the
These are
basis.
people who had come to our food studies classes, spoken to our students, people who had been invited to our Culinaria kitchen lab for events and so on over the years. So this is again collaboration, but collaboration going back many years. And I would say this is where two things are necessary. One is that, you know, like be open-ended. I didn't know back in, say, 2015, where we started, really creating classes where we could incorporate these things, that one day this would be a research grant. It was practice-based curricular development initially, and then it pivoted to research. But I did mostly global work before the pandemic, so it actually resulted in a farm to table project I was doing in India, and which of course I still haven't been able to resume. However, that laid the seeds for what became the Feeding City Pandemic and Beyond Research Project, which many of the people in this room are engaged with. And then it developed into, our different projects at the Feeding City Lab now, which includes our Shirk Partnership Development Grant, resilient urban communities, and local food systems. It also incorporated some of the work that through the School of Cities, two of our Culinaria colleagues, Ken McDonnell and Nat Bender, had initiated, which again has many people in this room involved, including our wonderful collaborator Lynn Milgram from OCAD University. And so we were able to pull those pieces together. But this is where I would say humility comes in, because through these 2 years, the students, the postdocs, our academic collaborators, and I have just felt whatever we've been able to do is so little compared to those folks like Jen and many, many others who are on the food front lines.
Yeah. Thanks, Joe. And one of the very first things you did, and you referenced this in the public platform, was build a website to showcase the grassroots work through the blog posts, student-authored blog posts, digital storytelling. Can you talk more about the role and importance of a public-facing platform as a form of knowledge mobilization, specifically for doing community-engaged humanities research and furthering those collaborations and goals?
Thanks, Jackie. So we applied to the Toronto COVID Action Initiative, and it was clear that the research we were doing was, it was not the standard kind of academic research, because it needed that there was that urgency of being able to advocate for support and also highlight the stresses, the inequities, the issues at stake, in the pandemic and, hopefully beyond, which of course we are still struggling to find the beyond even now. But part of what again we did was resulted out of previous collaborations we'd had, and not just for myself, with, as I said, many of the people, especially at Culinaria, where we saw how being able to equitably share our knowledge and co-create with community collaborators was so important. Because typically there is that, which I sometimes think of it as very, we are almost like parasites. We go in and we extract data and we publish in our academic journals and outputs which are important, but which do not reach communities, do not even reach the people who are the advocates, because there is absolutely amazing research being done there by many of these groups. Access Alliance, for instance, has created really amazing reports about environmental and food systems, and one of the things they have said, and it's always struck with me, is that academic research is often very short term, just like political planning is often short term.
The process of doing it.
The process of doing it, but also the
because
outcomes.
It can be very long too.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, but it's short term in the sense that it's geared to a particular project and a particular grant. The source of funding ends, you move on, right? So this is where we felt, and this is also where I was guided by our colleagues at Trinity who have the sustainability lab, that having a lab that would actually house these different projects and allow for some kind of continuity, but to have the public facing outputs where we could quickly share in a more accessible, quickly generative forms like the blog post. And that is entirely written by the students with the supervision of our postdocs. And it also allows the students, therefore, to take pride and ownership in their work instead of, doing the kind of work that Jen described and just having, the professors, write up articles about it. And so this way we feel that it is a process of knowledge co-creation, but also of more equitable knowledge sharing and dissemination.
And that I think one thing I'd like to mention here is that it's the website, the platform is growing too. So our collaborations are growing, and I would say not just growing and expanding, but deepening. The relationships are deepening, but the platform is also evolving. And so we do feature reports and blog posts and stories. And we'll also down the line over the course of the next year be developing podcast clips for a more multimedia kind of exposure and opportunity for digital storytelling. And those will also be accessible through the website. So it's another opportunity for training and for education within the lab, but also for sharing stories that we're working with here. So Joe, thinking about your experience now as a community engaged researcher, humanities researcher, in your transition from history to community engaged work, what are the top 3 tools in your kind of research toolbox for leading the Feeding City Lab? So it can be, take that however you wish, but thinking about, lessons learned, what are your top 3 tools?
I would actually say this is, in fact, history is one of the top tools.
Yeah.
Being able to look at what we are doing as living histories. And I like to tell people, I worked with dead people and dead archives for the first part of my academic career. But even those, inanimate archives are really animated by these living histories. So I think, and, my graduate students who are here, we've been talking about different modes of scholarship, different modes of engagement. And so I think really having that kind of interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary lens, and where one is able to take a historical view as well as the, kind of more contemporary view is very, very important in terms of community collaborations. And this is something that we can actually creatively bring to communities, that community advocates or community members do not perhaps have the time to sit, but that is where we can bring to them their histories and engage those past histories, those transnational histories, with the living histories that are being produced every single day by those on the food front lines. So that, I think is where the interdisciplinary scholarship can engage with living histories. I'm not sure if that's 1 or 2 tools.
Yes. Yeah.
I will say another one is, as I said, humility. Realizing that in the larger scheme of things, what we do as academics is not all that important. And so trying to actually evolve ways in which we listen and learn how to engage in dialogue and perhaps continually look for new ways of reciprocal co-creation. So I think this notion of reciprocity is something, we've all been reading about, especially through the work with Indigenous scholarship and Indigenous food sovereignty voices. And that is something that, I think is a really important piece of the community engaged toolkit. And the third one I will say is actually, again, being able to be versatile. So the posters you saw were created by these students who are not graphic artists. Every time we've kind of said that this is the problem, this is the request we've had from our community collaborators. Who is there at the lab who can help us with that? And those solutions have actually organically often come to us from the students. And so that is where, that type of versatility, because, I mean, again, those, I like engaging in many different things, but I think that is actually a strength because food studies allows for many different types of methodologies, many different types of collaborations. And that is what our collaborators, community collaborators, also need. They don't need us to say, oh, well, you know what, we are not designers, we can't do this. Because in many cases, it's turned out that our students had those skills. So we've been able to use the food studies, community engaged collaborations to produce everything from webs.
Marketing plans to, yeah.
Exactly. And, and Jackie, you and I were engaged in a much smaller collaboration in Malvern many years ago. And there we spent a lot of time looking around for people who had like the skills to help us develop a business plan. I will say now we don't actually have that hang up anymore. We are asked to help with something and we go ahead and do it. So at the Scarborough Food Network meeting every month, just as Jennifer did back in 2020, we have different collaborators, different organizations who come with some kind of request. And yes, we can't solve all of them ourselves, but that is where we can do outreach. And again, one of the new things we are hoping to do, and that is where I'm very delighted to see, so many amazing people from U of T in this audience that, Jennifer and other collaborators really want those stories to be told more broadly, to be shared beyond, say, just the spaces where that work is happening. And so we are looking around for tools to do it. And while we are doing it in some way, on the public facing website, now that in person research and activities are going to be allowed, we are exploring ways, for instance, of having perhaps a portable exhibit, an exhibition that comes up, say at the community kitchen where we are collaborators at Flip Kitchen, or at the market sites. Maybe it can come to the Culinaria kitchen, maybe it can come to the gardens at the university. So those are ways in which, we need to be able to listen, but also be versatile. Thanks. Sorry, that was a really long answer.
No, it was a really, really, really lovely answer. So thinking about the historical narratives and the skills that you bring as a historian, humility and versatility. And I absolutely agree. I think the interdisciplinarity of food studies combined with the community engaged element is really the strength of the Feeding City Lab and of nurturing the relationships with community collaborators in terms of the support that we can offer. So that brings me to research co-creation. And I had a couple of more questions, but just as we're wrapping up, Joe, here, I just wanted to invite any questions in the chat. If you have any pressing questions, please feel free to put them in the chat and we can come to them. But Joe, one of the many strengths of the Feeding City Labs is that it is a team-based project, and that's come out over the last hour. So what role has autoethnography played in the project, and how did it come about? And we're going to spend the next hour talking a little bit more in depth about autoethnography and what it is, and doing some draft kind of free writing exercises. But if you could just share with us how that element of the project emerged and how that ties into your broader point about research co-creation.
Well, again, that folks might remember that in the first half of 2020, most of us spent a lot of time obsessively talking about what we were trying to acquire for our own kitchens, engaging with those. And a shout out here to Dr. Brian Dale, our previous Culinaria postdoc, who was, then helping, assisting to manage this project. So with him, we were able to frame an autobiography, a set of templates to bring in these provisioning narratives. So we were going out, well, virtually, but we were going out on the food, to get these experiences and testimonies from the food front lines. But we also felt, especially as our team grew in scope, and we had, an increasingly diverse set of people engaged with us. So we started this autoethnography exercise, and it became very generative, because from each of the autoethnographies, which we anonymized and then only internally shared, is we realized that there were things that we didn't know about, or things that needed to be brought to light. And one of them, especially because I see Mike Lawler, the former market manager of the Junction, and of course Jennifer Forde is the new manager, was the vouchers program. The vouchers program that the Junction Market partners with a community health center, and which enables access to fresh fruits and vegetables to people who might not be able to access it at a farmer's market otherwise. So we knew about it from one of our students who had been a volunteer at the farmers markets for a couple of years, and who alerted us to the challenge of doing the kind of online shopping pivot on that. And then another insight was from another couple of our RAs who talked about the challenges of procuring halal food or the culturally diverse food, which I myself had experienced, because I can tell you getting my South Asian munchies was not an easy job during the pandemic. So that is where, even from our own middle class kind of lens, we were able to grasp the ways in which the pandemic was basically pushing people, and that was what the government policy was doing, towards the mainstream supermarkets, and was actually erasing many, many different kinds of things. And of course, when Jennifer came along and our other collaborators, came along with their food solutions to bring cultural diversity, to work on food equity and food assistance. So those provisioning narratives through the ethnography narratives helped us share our own personal experiences, but also be sensitized and listen to what was happening externally.
Thanks, Joe. And we will share a few of those redacted examples or anonymized examples later on in the workshop, or not the full ones, but just samples, extracts or snapshots, and how it came together as a collaborative form of ethnography. So we will be taking a 10-minute break before we regroup for that part of the workshop. Joe, before we do that, is there anything more that you wanted to share with us about your experience in building the Feeding City Lab as a community engaged research hub?
No, I think we are good here, except to just say that, we are also looking at this workshop as a way to, hear from all of you, and folks who'd like to maybe continue engaging on these topics and so on. So, Jackie, while we're taking the break, perhaps people can put in any questions, comments, anything they want in the chat, because that just might, allow us to engage better later. Thank you.
Absolutely. So we will reconvene in 10 minutes. Feel free to add any questions, comments in the chat. I will also put the links in the chat, and we will see everybody in about 10 minutes at 12 o'clock. Thank you, Joe.